Welcome, everyone. Welcome, friends and freedom lovers, to this very special Memorial Day edition of our podcast, Quantum Nurse Freedom International live stream. And today's discussion carries the weight of both history and urgency. And our theme, which I got inspired, it was the article also of our esteemed guest, Dr. Uwe Alschner, from 1776 to 2025, the battle between national sovereignty and the new one world order. So we gather at a time when the world is witnessing a profound clash between two visions, as Math Ehret, another esteemed guest for today, has always mentioned that one of sovereign, self governing nations rooted in liberty, and another of centralized, unelected technocracies moving toward a new kind of global empire. So we would like to remember today the brave men and women who gave their lives to secure our freedoms. And we ask, what would they think of the battles we face today? Not on the front lines of war, but in the silent corridors of the treaties, global institutions, and digital control grids. So I mention again our guest, Dr. Uwe Alschner and Matt Ehret, who are both not only geopolitical analysts, but for me, they are guardians of historical memory, constitutional wisdom, and spiritual discernment. And if we forget all of this, I think we'll really be in the future will be doomed to something that we don't really want. So, because this moment demands not just the knowledge, but courage as well. So, the kind of courage seen at Valley Forge, at the trenches of Normandy, and in every courtroom or town hall or school board meetings where freedom is defended. And I there's one quote that George Washington once said that the preservation of the sacred fire of liberty is finally staked on the experiment entrusted to the hands of the American people. So whether you approach this moment as a patriot, and we always say it's an exciting time, or a believer in divine providence, or a global citizen, concerned about technocratic overreach, this conversation is for you. So if you resonate with this conversation, please like, share, like, share, and subscribe, of course, and follow all our guests, okay? And so that experiment is now being tested again. So we can begin this conversation. And I am really very happy and excited that two of my favorite geopolitical analysts are here. And they're my favorite, not just them because I can feel that they're kind in their hearts, but they do mean well in every word that they say, and they are really guardians for me in everything. So I truly respect their opinions, their thoughts. I may not fully understand that at that moment that I'm listening, but I know eventually they can help me connect the dots. And of course, I welcome my good friend Hartmut Schumacher from Germany, who's always here with me. And eventually, maybe Drago Bosnic from Serbia will join us as well, as he too doesn't want to miss the presence of Matt Ehret and Uwe Alschner, who are both his colleagues. Matt, Uwe, welcome. So, okay. So, I was thinking maybe we could begin and any of you could start, but maybe Uwe, you should start just because I borrowed your title of your article. Okay. So he said, look, in the section where we could discuss on the founding principles versus modern globalism. So if we look back to 1776, what revolutionary ideals are most under threat today by global technocratic systems? And how would the founders respond to this moment? And both of you, I know, has written many articles, and Matthew has written books, made videos, and later on, please keep inviting our viewers to where they could get in touch with you. So,
Right.
Uwe?
So, yeah, well, thank you very much, Grace, for the kind introduction. It feels like it's a little bit over the top in terms of praise. I really like when people agree with me, but I also like if people do not agree with me, but engage in constructive discussion and debate about things which, at least as far as I publish stuff, it is very close to my heart. It's mostly thoughts which I would like to see discussed. And in this particular piece, which you alluded to, from 1776, the Battle of National Sovereignty and One World Order, is something which I want people, the audience, to understand that, of course, this is written from a non-American citizen. So not only not a U.S. citizen, but I'm not even American, which I know Matt Ehret is, and therefore, had history taken some other turn, he might have already, his country might even have already joined the U.S., and therefore it is a very direct, um, concern of his to study this history, and of course this whole issue of Canada becoming the 51st state of the U.S., yes or no, had been big in the headlines over the recent weeks and months. But in my case, I am looking at it from a European and particularly from a German perspective, where until a very short time ago, I didn't really get what the unique project of 1776, so the American independence, really was. So I'm saying this as a trained historian who, well, I mean, I was introduced to, of course, world history and also even major events in U.S. history. So I thought, but what it was really about, I had no big idea. But today I'm of the opinion, very, very decidedly so, that this event back then, 250 years ago almost, or these events, some of which already are 250 years past, this is something which is of very high relevance for what is going on today in terms of how people look at the world. And when you say, Grace, in your introduction, that we are living through a moment where two opposing worldviews are clashing, this is true. But I have come to understand from teachers such as Anton Chaikin or the late H. Graham Lowry, and also from work which Matt Ehret, his wife Cynthia Chung, have done, that this is something basically which has been around. So this clash has been around for, well, at least 500 years now, that there have been those two very fundamentally different views of the world, or even of man, what man is, human properties, human dignity. And this is something which one of the camps, which eventually succeeded in 1776 with their Declaration of Independence, so the inalienable rights of man or of human, of course, this always included men and women at the time, as it still does today. This is something which the other camp has been denying all along, and even for much longer than 500 years. So in order to understand what it is we can do and must do or should do today, I think it is very essential that we take the pains and make the effort to understand what was behind this major historical event, which eventually led to the founding of the United States of America. Of course, today people are very quick to reject America based on the experience of the past, let's say 50 or even 100 years or 120 years maybe, or maybe even a bit later than that. But this is not America, as Anton Chetkin in his new series, Who We Are, is trying to point out. This is not America. But what America is not necessarily American in the way that it is unique to America, but it is uniquely expressed in the US Constitution. And that is something we need to understand. And we need to understand, I think, it's in our interest to understand this and to revive our own engagement with those ideas.
Yeah, that's good. And I also, it's interesting that we're all talking about the universality of this thing that happened in 1776, and none of us are really like from the United States per se. I know, Grace, you live in New Jersey, but it's an irony that I find very rich. And you don't know what you got till it's gone, in a sense, and I myself as well, being in a Canadian education system victim, I had no emotional connection. I knew that it happened. We all knew that this American Revolution happened, but I had zero emotional connection to it. It was just a trivial factoid in my mind growing up, and it was only when I began to become more politically aware of the darker contour shaping history, from my discoveries that 9/11 was a lie, and then onward, you peel back the onion layers and discover that there's a completely different story than what we're popularly led to believe about what's been shaping all of the wars and the assassinations and the revolutions, which is much darker, but yet still more interesting than is popularly led to believe. And then I began to revisit some of those trivial facts that didn't mean much to me, like what was 1776 all about, with a new set of eyeglasses, a new set of lenses. And I began appreciating so much more, like you just said, what was brought into this world at that moment, albeit imperfectly, but the ideas are so universally sound, and it could have only occurred with the collaboration of an international network from all parts of the world who were able to think on that higher level of natural law, with a faith that humanity was destined for something so much greater than what we had experienced for the thousands of years before that moment, living under systems of empire, of might makes right, hereditary rule of various varieties. So, yeah, I mean, I totally concur with everything you just said as well. And it just, the idea of humanity maturing based on the idea that we could all we could situate our notion of self-government around the idea that the authority of law per se is not arbitrary. It doesn't come from the mighty. It doesn't come from the powerful families that can impose their definitions of what is truth or what should be done onto the masses, but rather that it comes from the consent of the governed. That's a powerful idea, and it only works if you have a culture which encourages people to integrate their desires and their duty into maturity, so that they increasingly learn how their loves, their pleasures should be matured to want what is also what is necessary and good, so that there's no incongruity, right, between what we should do and what we want to do, which so many people in a more bestialized, mediocre society or culture that have been victimized by oligarchical social engineering and manipulation, they always, there's a tendency to have a dichotomization, a clash of the individual with the self. Like we should do something, but we know nobody wants to do what they should do. But no, as the founding fathers were much deeper philosophers than people realize today. They were much more saturated with the thoughts of people like Gottfried Leibniz, the worldview of James Logan, the high Renaissance thinkers. That's what Benjamin Franklin represented as a real Renaissance man, a scientist, statesman, artist, poet. They had a much deeper idea that humanity you had to fight for a culture that would bring about the better aspects of ourselves so that we could be sovereign, and thus our consent, our desires would carry, even the poorest among us would carry still authority of natural law, and then we could participate in the government so that everybody was sovereign, not just one sovereign person in a throne distributing rights onto the masses, but that everybody was sovereign. Revolutionary idea, and yeah, I think we're totally. There's a huge risk right now of losing that, and people don't if they take it for granted what occurred and what rights they have that still can't be fought for, it will be taken away. And there's been over 200 years of effort by humanity's enemies to chip away at that, so that we forget to appreciate this wonderful privilege that is in our grasp currently, and we're allowing it to slip away. So it is a bit scary.
Thank you, Uwe. Thank you, Matt. And you're both right, especially Matt saying that, we are. We're not, none of us are originally, let's say, born in America, and yet we value the 1776 history. And I still remember taking US history in the Philippines, that it was mandatory during high school. And it was just very differently discussed. And then I became part of an underground movement. And the more that I got confused, I learned the history of my Philippine history, but that was colored in terms of really hating or looking at the entire United States as an imperialist empire.
Mhm.
So, but the 2019 and that crazy pandemic made me really pay attention to the history. And thank you, Matt, because you were part of what my learning curve was, and then Uwe, and then other things. So, and I now know the importance that knowing the true history is what would lead me myself to be able to appreciate and understand why I suddenly find myself being here in United States. And this I consider as my homeland now, because this is where I lived for the last many years. As I respect the Philippines as my native land, but here I am now. So in every situation, I believe that when you are put in a situation or in a condition where you're at, that doesn't mean you should reject your environment, but understand the environment and now your role in that environment in terms of sovereignty. So, basically, Filipino people are peaceful people, but we're warriors as well. Don't tramp on our sovereignty. For some of us, will really fight for it. So that leads me to my next question, and Hartmut, feel free to come in anytime. And so many believe that today's technocratic and global governance systems resemble the centralized control that the colonies rebelled against. So is this kind of like a fair comparison? And if so, how far have we drifted from the original vision of self-rule?
Uwe, go for it.
Uh, so of course it is a challenge to discuss, or even just to look at this problem, which spans 3 centuries. The situations has changed fundamentally, so one must always be aware of there being certain things which are totally different. And I'm also not quite sure as to in which way the term centralized makes sense, even from a historical perspective. When we need to understand that central Yes, okay. London might have been central and certainly was central in one way, but then again, London was a project which had different powers, exerting their influence on it throughout history and throughout the times which we discuss here. So that's one thing. Then the royal household is some institution which was quite decisive in many ways, but it's based on an oligarchical system with very many different participants who have rivalries, which is a similarity to today. So there are also many interests joined in one way in terms of them being more in the oligarchical camp, but not necessarily being on the same page in every different aspect on this. So therefore, it is quite a challenge to say I agree or I agree I don't agree with what you have said, but certainly there is, I think, a challenge in the way that this needs to be understood as a possibility that behind what is going on is indeed some central idea or some central power center, which is not that apparent, especially when we assume the view of many people that America is the evil force and the imperial force in the world, which is true in one way, but it's a very superficial assessment, because that what they see as America is in fact, in its essence, not really American, like what America originally meant, and it's also not even American in the way it is being played out today. That doesn't mean that someone is taking orders from someone in a literal way, but it means that this is a very complicated, very complex system of ideas which plays out today in a very unique way due to the technological progress which we have experienced over the past 250 years.
Yeah, I'll chime in, I guess, too. There's obviously similarities and there's differences. It's so, I mean, 250 years ago, to have a small coterie of citizen farmers who were able to organize against the world's biggest military and political intelligence power and banking power in the world, and be successful, albeit again with the help of collaborative efforts of like-minded people in different parts of the world, that made it viable. Otherwise, if it was just the American colonists by themselves, it would have been squashed. It could not have been successful. So you had to have a conspiracy that harmonized different like-minded participants from different sectors and different cultures around some idea of breaking free of the Hobbesian sort of ethos or system of control of might makes right. But the empire was so powerful. I mean, it's incredible to think about. The British Empire had just become the alpha, right? And the 7 Years' War had only recently ended in 1763. And with that, most of England's rivals were subdued under the control dynamic of the City of London, which, just like today, even back then, was the center of world finance. So you had a statistically impossible challenge for citizens who thought on a higher level to fight against that, but they were able to accomplish that. And it happened through leadership. It's not because you had necessarily, the zeitgeist just got sick of paying too much taxes to a foreign power. It was like there was an element of the zeitgeist factor, but it wasn't the way Hegel talks about it. It was that you had self-conscious sublime individuals like Ben Franklin, who had organized to become cultural shapers, to uplift through, the Poor Richard's Almanac, through the printing press that they, that he'd worked very hard through his work in science as well, to distribute and disseminate better methods of thinking about science and the relationship philosophically of humanity to the universe, that's expressed through our ability to discover God's creation and then make improvements, in terms of coming up with new inventions that allow us to harness the forces of nature in a beneficial way. So all of these things that Ben Franklin did, in turn, he was a creature of his culture, but he shaped the culture because he was able to think on that higher level and build up a leadership cadre. And that leadership cadre is so important. That then gave people that space, the creative space that they needed, so that even lower level people who were not themselves able to initiate or be causative agents in great flanks, great creative maneuvers, when they were under the influence of a Ben Franklin, they were able, the best part of themselves was brought out, and they became useful citizens. When Ben Franklin died, you saw that many of those who were very useful under his influence became disasters, like Thomas Jefferson. After Ben Franklin was out of the picture, Jefferson really didn't have a moral guide anymore and became increasingly influenced to support the growth of the slave power. And many of America's enemies were laughing happy that such a man who played a very important role during the American Revolution became increasingly their asset, I think, despite himself. So, there's that factor. And of today's, we know that when you look at Jeremy Bentham and his drafting of his ideal system of control through his panopticon, the system of that for his ideal prisons, where every prisoner would self-police, because they would always feel like they were being watched by some central agency. Although Bentham pointed out, you didn't even have to have any prison guards. People just had to feel like they were being watched, and they would self-police. And he was right. And he wanted that type of system, not just for prisons. I think he wanted that for his ideal sort of imagined society as well. Very Orwellian, proto-Orwellian. And in that sense, he knew that the greatest enemy, or the greatest control that would allow this to happen, was the minds of the people. It was that the people were going to be, through fear and through having little identities that would be beaten down, they would self-police. That would be the way that this would be managed. And so I think that's today's problem too. We wonder, on the one hand, we lack a sense of what we should expect of leaders in society, right? Of the Martin Luther King Jr.'s, the John F. Kennedy personality types who rose to a much higher, mature, sublime identity. We've lost a sense that that's even possible, and people have been fed all sorts of gossip about Ben Franklin and Lincoln and John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King, and they've been fed so much gossipy slander to try to reduce these men to be, pedophiles, rapists, hypocrites. Like, all of these lifestyles of the rich and famous, gossipy things have been really spread to reduce them, so that we don't actually learn from these examples, these exemplars of the better humanity. And then at the same time, we've lost the sense to look for that in ourselves too. So because we've lost the mentorship, we've lost the role models that's been cut away from us. So we've become increasingly detached of our ability to find those that better, like Schiller points out, there's an ideal within all of us, right? An ideal part of ourself that we should focus on, trying to become more like what we want to be. And so as that became disjointed, we all became more mediocritized, I think, as well, so that we became susceptible to the Jeremy Bentham panopticon self-policing dynamic that we see now very clearly in how people feel like they can't say things out loud, or else they might be heard saying bad thoughts, that their machines are listening to them, that their phones and their computers and their TVs are listening to them. So everyone is increasingly becoming more and more, we're abrogating our potentialities to be the better part what we need to be at a time, especially of crisis. And very, so I think that in that sense, there are a lot of similarities and a lot of things to learn from as far as how many people faced those fears in 1776. And they knew that if they were not successful, they were putting out a big risk. They were, these farmers with families were putting everything on the line based on their idea of saying, we're going to risk it all to fight for a better type of society. They had to really, every individual had to confront those fears, because the British, look at John, the British were ruthless at torturing, mutilating, trying to destroy and make examples out of those colonists who decided to take up the fight. So again, so many similarities, so many parallels, and so many things to learn from, I think.
I have a question, maybe Matt or Uwe. What I don't understand is Karen Hughes said something very interestingly. She said that the secret services all over the world work together like banks, and that every secret service has to make an annual report to the Vatican. And Jordan Maxwell said that the Freemasons, the Vatican, and the Jews, they will all make rituals according to the Kabbalah. And the USA is a Freemason state, more or less. And my question is, how has it come that, for example, in the 1776, when, let's say, really enlightened person wrote the Constitution and have changed as they were Freemasons, and the Freemasonry has changed everything until now in this kind of technocracy?
I could say something, but Uwe, do you want to handle that first, or?
Well, I would encourage Hartmut to not brush off this information which you've come across, but to not seek immediately satisfaction, immediate gratification for the question which has come to your mind, but maybe there is something more to discover in this, and that is, for example, the possibility that half-truth might be involved, that the situation is not a black and white one. I mean, when you say America is a Freemason state, well, okay, I might be prepared to consider this thought in a particular way, but in another way, I would completely reject it as being very, very superficial and without any nuance, because you would have to look at the history of Freemasonry for once to get an understanding of what it really is that people are referring to, and that's something which will lead to very interesting discoveries. And then, of course, me and you being German, it is also very problematic to be thinking and discussing in general terms about groups of the Jews or whatever. I'm not really comfortable in doing that, because in a similar way, there's not the Jews.
It's not the
in
Jews.
this
No,
respect.
wait a minute. It's not the Jews. No, I don't
No,
think. I never said it's the Jews.
No.
It's
Hear me out. Hear me out.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that is what you're saying, but it is a term which you have been also making use of in your question, which in itself is very complex, and therefore I would be hesitant to say that this and this group have the similar practice or whatever. The Kabbalah is certainly something which plays a role in the shaping of worldviews for a lot of people, and for a lot of groups. So therefore, this is something which will lead to discoveries, or which will lead to opinions, or even knowledge eventually, which, for example, Matt Ehret has been publishing a lot about in his recent works. So therefore, Matt, this is something where you are much better prepared to answer the question in general. But all I'm saying is, I have been studying many hours and many topics over the past 18, 24 months, or even a little bit longer, which on issues which I would never have thought about wasting another minute about it, because I had it all ticked off on my list of professional training as a historian, and this is something where I've come to appreciate the value of going back to sources and assessing stuff from a differentiated, nuanced perspective.
I'm sure Hartmut will be back. It's not unusual that he has a tech problem. But anyway, I thank you for your response. So, Matt, continue.
Oh yeah, I really wish Hartmut was still here, because I did have some thoughts as well to share based on what Uwe said. Because I had written a book that I published recently called the Revenge of the Mystery Cults. This is volume 3, Edgar Allan Poe's Final Mystery and Other Tales of Ratiocination. And chapter 7 is the Mormon role in the purge of Republican Freemasonry. And in it, what I tried to do, there's her. Hey, Hartmut. Okay, yeah, man. I just wanted to chime in, and I'm glad you're back, because I was just pointing out that I just published this book called the Revenge of the Mystery Cults, Volume 3, and I got a chapter in there that deals with what you were bringing up as well, based on it's called The Mormon Role in the Purge of Republican Freemasonry, and it deals with the lack of nuance which most conspiracy researchers I've noticed, including Jordan Maxwell, they skip steps, and they find there's something called pattern recognition thinking, which is a useful thing that we do as humans as part of the research process. But if we cast judgments about events causally based on simply the pattern recognition step, and we don't go beyond it, then a lot of mistakes, oversimplified errors tend to happen that lack context and nuance. Computers do pattern recognition thinking. That's what we do when we program a computer, is we get it to look for patterns that are associated with meanings, and that the computer will cast a judgment on whatever pattern it's programmed to recognize. So we don't want to think too much like computers, and I find a lot of conspiracy researchers do that. And it's easy to do that because the oligarchy uses symbolisms, they use numerology, they use astrological patterns in planning out a lot of what they do when you get into the occult side of things. But there was, in my research about the purge of the Republican movements from the Freemasonic lodges, especially in Europe between 1790 and 1815, which is the big period of the big purges, and then in America from 1825 until 1840 was the biggest purges of the Republicans from those lodges. As one thing that comes out when you're reading the writings of people like J.J. Gurgas, who was the head of the Grand Master of the Northern Jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite in America, or Albert Pike, who was the Grand Master of the Southern branch of the Southern Jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite. They were both Rosicrucian Hermeticists, Satanists. They were Satanists, but they wrote a lot of their writings down too. And when you read them, they were ecstatic, both of them, so happy about the purgative cleanse of the anti-Masonic movement of 1825 to 1840 in the United States. You know, there was a big anti-Masonic movement. Most of the lodges were shut down. they're not unhappy. They're extremely happy. And it became clear to me that they were actually, it was ironically a Masonic organization that was running through the Mormons, that purge that resulted in only the most evil, corrupted, Rosicrucian dominated lodges surviving after that purge. And what they also talk about is there's strong indication that the oligarchy was very angry that there was a Christianization of the lodges in the American colonies, especially. So from 1740, and a lot of this had to do with Benjamin Franklin's work with his network at fighting to take control of many of the lodges, not all, but many of the American colonies' lodges. And what they did do is they brought in a Christianization of those lodges. And there was a network of lodges in Vienna, in France, the Nine Sisters Lodge, which Marquis de Lafayette and many of the better French scientist statesmen were operating in. Lavoisier was another member of this lodge group. In Vienna, you had the New Harmony Lodge of Mozart and Schinkenader, who was a leading scientist, educator in Vienna. And that lodge actually was the head of that lodge was actually a former African prince who was brought into slavery and became a very sublime, noble character and an advisor to a variety of court leaders. I forgot his name, Soliman. And so you had these. It really was this Christianized Platonic takeover, this coup of the lodges that saw the lodges become used as instruments for organizing. They didn't have telephones, they didn't have even telegraphs, they didn't have encryption. So to be able to coordinate secretly international collaboration around getting certain things done, the lodges were one of the only ways to securely do that. You couldn't even send letters securely because the regular post was being constantly searched by assets of the British Empire. So it was very difficult. So the lodges were a practical thing on the one hand, and they had a certain philosophical notion amongst those Christianized lodges that Ben Franklin was a part of, that there was a mandate that humanity was made in the image of a living, reasonable creator, and we were destined for something better. This is the Platonic sort of conspiracy, and in opposition to the Neoplatonic, occultists who were also operating and working to destroy them. And we saw, like I said, between 1790 in Europe to 1815, those Rosicrucian black magician types successfully destroy most of the Republican lodges of Europe. And then that same thing was replicated in America. Very little good survived. And I think there were some traces of goodness in the American lodges afterwards, but very, very little compared to what was available before 1825. So there's this is researchable. It's something that is available. There's information, source writing that is available for any researcher to investigate. And I'm sad that Jordan Maxwell and many other conspiracy researchers, they don't care. They just don't want to look at it. And they're so happy with their formula that Freemasonry equals this one definition, this one simple thing which is evil. And anytime I see it, I can associate actions associated with this evil thing as being evil. And thus they can just brush aside, the American Revolution as a controlled psyop. Everything is a controlled psyop. There's nothing that they're just overlooking a lot. And I think it's intellectual laziness personally.
No, thank you. So thank you so much. This was exactly what I wanted to hear. That's brilliant.
The one thing to point out too, after the Freemason, like the Rosicrucian takeover of those lodges in America, that's when you had a lot of the occult there's the Washington Monument, right? Celebrating George Washington, and it's weird that it's a giant obelisk with a Vesica Pisces, at the base. So you got this phallic. This phallic representation for masculine sexual energy in the Vesica Pisces, representing the womb, the vagina, right there in Washington, D.C., and you're like, that's a strange homage to George Washington, who was a Freemason. That's true. But you're like, when was it done? And I was surprised to find out it was only built in like 1833 or 1834. And most people, because it was a competition. It was a competition at the time of the anti-Masonic purges going on, and there was a competition to do people were like, finally, let's do a statue in honor of George Washington. Why didn't we do this yet? It's 50 years since the revolution. We don't have a statue. So they put out a competition, and all these artists were submitting their designs. And then this weird selection team, which was run by a bunch of occultists, said, okay, we found our winner, and they gave it to this dude. And they were like, okay, let's build the obelisk. And everybody was wondering, like, why is it an obelisk? Like, nobody was happy with this thing. And George Washington wasn't like religious about his Freemasonry. It was like something that was done for practical purposes at the time. But he would have been much happier with just a cool statue of himself or something, you know? So what they did is they tried to rebrand, like 2 generations after the American Revolution. They tried to rebrand what the American Revolution was about to say, this is a Freemasonic ritual. But all of the revolutionaries were long dead at that point. And then the rebranding sort of began to seep into our textbooks and become part of the culture. So that's another thing to keep in mind when you're looking at a lot of how this happened, right?
Yeah. What I remember is there were many Freemasons in America, and then many Freemasons left the Freemasonry, like you said. Yeah, so many good people believed in Freemasonry, and then there was a time when they said no, and they left it, and many societies crashed because they had no people anymore. And I think this was also a marketing strategy, like you said. It's very, very, very interesting. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure.
And
Hartmut, I just want to say on my personal story about Freemasons, because there's also Mason group in my province. I got a scholarship from the Mason group for 5 years in college, so I appreciate that. And then my uncle was a Mason member, and my aunt was an Amaranth, the women's side, and they were almost courting me to be part of that Amaranth while I was in college. But nevertheless, all I know is they helped me with my studies, and I didn't turn out to be in the bad side of that group. Okay, so it's good to always know the good things, and because in every institution and organization, everything is infiltrated, and there's always that rhetoric of propaganda. So I just want to share that to you.
One thing. Oh yeah, Hartman, go say a word, and I have a thought I want to share too.
Yeah, I want to mention that what you said, Grace, that every department or every institution, they are good people. Yeah, I could listen to a soldier or to a CIA agent, and he said that 80 to 90% of all people who work in the Secret Service or, for example, in the military are good people. Yeah, this is interesting. Yeah, people who believe and have high values.
Yeah.
Only this was my statement.
Yeah. No, I was thinking about one of those ironies, because there's many really good people who are Freemasons. I know several, and they're authentically super good, authentically good human beings. And I as you guys know, I studied deeply wrote Franklin Roosevelt as a person, his policies, his fights, his enemies. So I really admire Franklin Roosevelt. Roosevelt was a 32nd degree Mason. And it's like, that's pretty high level, but does that make him bad? And what did he experience going from his first degree to the 32nd, or I think he might have even been 33rd degree? What did he experience versus what is likely to have been the sorts of experiences of, let's say, another 33rd degree Freemason like J. Edgar Hoover, who was his contemporary and also made it to 33rd degrees, but the output of his life was so much more destructive than a Franklin Roosevelt. So you could say, okay, number one, maybe they're controlled oppositions. right? Maybe they're not really on the other on enemies of each other. Maybe they're actually on the same. So maybe there's that, or there's something else going on. And I noticed that Roosevelt was literally, he went from the first degree when he was like, 21 years old. They brought him in. He went from the first degree to the 33rd degree in like 6 months. 6 months. J. Edgar Hoover, 35 years. And so J. Edgar Hoover, like Roosevelt's a guy who's from like one of the rich, dominant American families. Some of his family members were really good. Some of the other family members were really bad. Some of them played a big role in the opium trade, like the Delano clan. But the point being is, there were certain expectations that he would represent his class, and the oligarchy puts a lot of emphasis on class, number one. And if you're born in and you have like aptitudes, charisma, ambition, they're like, okay, you're going to be a political asset and we're going to put our mark on it. We're going to brand you, right? We're going to do that. So they part of what that involves in the political the reality is to put them through the ringer and say, okay, you're now one of us. So Roosevelt was given like a fast track to getting that 33rd degree thing. J. Edgar Hoover had to really work for it. The desire to be in the inside club was cultivated, and it grew over many years of him being tested, put through a different set of experiences to result in him fanatically being part of this weird mystical conspiracy that he so desperately wanted to be a part of, even to the point that he would do the most evil things in the world, participating in the murder of JFK, of presidents, of leaders, and other things. So working with mafia. So I think you got that as well. And then on top of that, you seem to have, there's evidence that two people who are in the 19th or 20th degree of Freemasonry are not experienced in the same 19th or 20th degree, because what seems to happen when you go through these rites and rituals, and it seems like there's something similar in the Jesuit initiation process too, as they rise to higher ranks, is two people are given, let's say, a test of, kill the puppy. I have to use this example. Like, they're given this test at some point of kill the puppy, and one person, one 17th degree person kills the puppy, and the other person, who's also 17th degree, does not kill the puppy. And both of them are told, congratulations, you've made it to the 18th degree. However, that 18th degree is no longer going to be the same thing for both men. And there does seem to be these parallel 19th, 20th, 23rd, all of these other degrees are going to be two different universes, whereby these two seeming initiates are going to have two separate sets of experience and two separate roles to play, where one will be given more responsibilities for bad things, and the other one is going to be kept out of positions of having those kinds of responsibilities, if possible.
And will serve as an example that everything is, of course, perfectly okay.
Yeah. If they're this nice person is the representative of what the 27th degree means, well, it can't be all that bad. Look, they're pretty okay. And it's like, it's a great deflection away from this other, shadow system. That seems to be something I've encountered a lot of evidence for in my research, that there are these parallel tracks, one esoteric, one exoteric, even amongst the degrees.
Which brings me to an idea which I would like to share at this moment, particularly because I think what we are talking about is what role did Freemasonry in this context play for the American Revolution as a Republican anti-oligarchical project. And of course, it did play a very significant role due to the fact that it was very difficult to keep those plans under control from being, and keep them from being hijacked and destroyed prematurely. I think this is not a researched factual discovery yet, but it is a working hypothesis that those leaders in the day knew that they were called to 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 be held to account on what they did within their respective group. So to really understand that you have to explain certain actions which you've done or not done to your group, for them to make up their minds whether things are still okay or not okay. And this is something which I have an impression is lacking today, where we think black and white, friend or foe. You may not question anybody who is in a leading position, who has done so much for us, because they have done so much for us. Now, taking this this example, which Matt has just said, sorry, this would mean, sorry, this is, I got a boat.
Exciting thoughts, that's why. Sometimes when you get so excited about saying something, suddenly your throat gets tight.
Well, this is the water sabotage, I guess, or I don't know. Yeah.
Well, it does mean, or it would mean that you would have certain situations in which people might appear to have violated their duties or their mission, and would be asked to give account of what they have been doing, which is an essential way of keeping an understanding and keeping a direction about how things are going. I remember this. I don't have the literal quote, unfortunately, but Jonathan Swift, who was, of course, a very Matt has said it frequently, has been a very important ally for Gottfried Leibniz, working within Britain whilst Leibniz was still in Hanover, but trying to shape things also in London. And Swift has been on the record for saying, I wonder how future ages will look upon this and try to make sense of things which cannot be written down, because if what is written down has a totally obscure meaning to those who are not in the know. Basically, this is my interpretation of that very quote, which I don't get to recount at this moment. But you see what I mean? Is the knowledge and the being okay with it, to have yourself being questioned at certain moments about certain things, because otherwise the organization, if they would all be following each other blindly, trusting upon each other, it runs a high risk of being derailed.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Very good thoughts. Very good points.
Well, how about this question? Since especially during the pandemic, the World Health Organization and many other global institutions have really played a lot of role in how we were all controlled. So, are these international global organizations eroding national sovereignty of countries?
Well, that's that's a pretty softball question. I think we're all of the consensus that that's happening. Yeah, that's probably what the intention is. Yes.
That's really very sad. Like for me, because as a nurse and I've always respected World Health Organization, even when I was in the Philippines working for community health organizations. And at one point, there's this nurse leader in America and said, Grace, how about you do a video with me for the World Health Organizations? And I did that little video with them too. And that was before 2019. So,
Yeah.
It wasn't one of the dancing nurses videos, right?
no, not the dancing video. No, not a
This-
bad dancing video. It was just promoting. Because at that time, I was one of the 21 nurses who went to China as representatives, and that was a good trip. But then maybe there was a uh, side agenda of making that promotion for 2020 agenda, because I went to China in 2010. So anyway, so not the dancing one. So that was way before the pandemic.
Okay.
And
I want to mention something that the World Health Organization was, let's say, repeatedly or regularly nearly close to being bankrupt until Bill Gates started to support them.
Yeah.
So then
Well, and
follow
more
the money.
precisely-
That's it.
Right, but more precisely, I think it would be good to say until the decision was made that Bill Gates put money into the WHO, because I think one thing is becoming, at least in my assessment, it's becoming more and more clear. Things are not the way they appear to be. It's not just, this or this person is the most wealthy person of the world, and therefore is controlling stuff, and Gates is investing in the WHO. Yes, he is, but he's not the only one, and it's probably something which is discussed amongst more than one people, and decisions are being made due to a certain agenda. But I wanted to say something about what Grace said as a sad fact about this discovery, about this conclusion, is, of course, yeah, but that's exactly what we've been discussing with Freemasonry as well. There's so much good in organizations which are not as such bad per se, but are being used as instruments for bad goals. And in order for those to be put in a position to do what they to do the bad stuff which they some want them to do, they have to do, or have to appear to do, good stuff before, because otherwise people would reject it outright. And that applies also to the European Union, for example, with respect to how many Europeans viewed this project of peace, right? I wholeheartedly believe that the European project was a peace project, because we experienced so much war in the past, and if there was no boundaries or whatever, it would be more peaceful and more good. Of course, this is a very, very naive way to look at things, which excludes all the reasons why wars have been fought, perpetual wars have been fought throughout history. And in fact, that this might have been just one way to get people to accept stuff which they otherwise wouldn't have never accept, but making sure in the way this was set up, and Europe is a case in point, it has never been anywhere close to a democratic republican organizational structure. It has always been set up as something which was under tight control of a very small group of interests, so to speak. And therefore, people have accepted this idea because they were sick of killing each other. This is the populations, without questioning the motives, possible motives of what is behind. And this is exactly what is now happening in the question about peace in Ukraine, for example, where right now in Germany there's a huge row about people asking questions from other people who are who are leading or seem to be leading in the peace movement, because they tie the quest for peace to a European project, which is a red flag for many experienced researchers, because the European project is, in its essence, never was a peace project, but something else. So why would you want to tie it to the idea of Europe when you want peace in Ukraine? These are two separate ideas.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And the point I would just throw in too, based on what you just said, and is the fact that many of these crises that we're told to be afraid of and abrogate our personal freedoms or sovereignty towards protecting ourselves from, whether it's wars that so traumatized the Europeans to the point that they accepted the solution to war, which was give up your local sovereignty for a European Union type of more protective body, modeled on the United States of America. It'll be the United States of Europe, but without any of the principled concepts that gave validity to the U.S. founding documents and culture. None of that. So the idea was always a technocratic smokescreen to get, based on the idea that you should be afraid of the trauma of wars and wars in the future, so wars or pandemics, ignoring the international biowarfare infrastructure built up by war criminals from World War II to the present, that has been working on releasing various weaponized pathogens into the population periodically, that did, the weaponized anthrax operations or Event 201. Just ignore all of that and just be afraid of or global warming. So pandemics or disease, and global warming now is another one, and be afraid of the climate changing. And it's like, whether wars, global warming, pandemics, all of these things to be afraid of, they're all artificially manufactured. And this is what we're not allowed to talk about. You just can't talk about the fact that none of these things are real. Terrorism is another one, right? All of these things, if you scratch a little critically on the surface narrative, you just find the hand of intelligence agencies and psyops everywhere, artificially making these things happen. They're not naturally emergent phenomena. They don't naturally happen. That's not what occurs. It's all artificial. So there's that. Now, does that mean that there's never a reason to work together on common projects, common ambitions, common defenses? No, there's valid reasons. The universe is not a perpetually peaceful place. There's all kinds of evidence of super destructive astroclimatological phenomena, whether asteroid impacts, which happen periodically all the time, killing tons of species and ecosystems, and volcanism, earthquake, crazy bad tsunamis, earthquakes, solar flares. That all of this seems to be generated by the sun, and the sun's rhythms, and how the sun is being shaped by the galaxy and its relationship to the galactic core. And so there's things we don't really fully understand, but we know that there are these higher destructive things that we could be working together to understand more of, and then maybe put into action policies and technologies that will protect Earth and the species from those sorts of things that resulted in 99.99% of all life that it's ever existed to not be here anymore. It didn't just go, generally these species don't go peacefully into the night. Usually there's some cataclysm. So we could be, we're the first species that seems to exhibit the quality where we could potentially prevent another mass extinction event if we're working together and if we're wise. But that the oligarchy doesn't want that. They want to create fake fears and crises for us to submit to, which is disgusting, because it's like there's something truthful. There's something in being able to unite and work together for common ends. There's something good about that. And maybe in another world, the United States of Europe could have been a good, viable idea if it was premised on a different set of notions of what humanity is, what government should be. It might have worked, and maybe in the future it can work, but the way it was sold was such a fraud designed to enslave. It's unfortunate.
I want to mention something because I had yesterday a very interesting and long conversation about the future of Germany and Europe.
Mm.
And interestingly, in 5 years, this was the opinion of my discussion partner. In 5 years, Germany will have the largest military equipment, or the biggest militarization in whole Europe.
Mm.
And whole Europe in total will be militarized to the teeth in 5 years, because we are now changing in Germany from a let's say from a general economy to a war economy, and this is and we can listen to it in the news, but we don't see it, we don't hear it. But if someone is involved in these things, it's mind blowing. It's mind blowing how the companies are transformed in military equipment. For example, let's say um, companies which are establishing um, which are responsible for repairing um, railways, or repairing the wagons of the for the trains. Yeah, they will also construct bombs or ammunition and something like that. It's and so the whole and interestingly, in Germany, the debt limit was increased very much. Yeah, 1.8 trillion, I suppose, or it was 1.8 trillion. But interestingly, the the investment for military has no limit at all.
Yeah,
So
it's sick.
this, yeah, and this will transfer Germany completely in a different direction. And in 5 years, well, the question is, when Germany is going to be militarized in this way, with whom they are going to work. We got also this in the conversation. We also discussed the situation that maybe Germany will go in alliance with China.
Um, I mean that's a big hypothetical, but I know that definitely there is the new global defense bank, which Keir Starmer and company in Europe have proposed, and that I think Draghi is also a big fan of. On top of that, with the idea of creating this, essentially they want it to work on the base on the model of the World Bank, and they want it to be outside of the budgets, the regular operating budgets of the different national participating countries' economies, and to provide sort of like credit for military industrial growth. Now, I just say I don't see how viable that is for two reasons, and I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Because on the one hand, we've never in all of human history, this is a weird thing that we're living in right now. We've never had so many consecutive generations of consumerism, decadence, mediocrity that has resulted in us deindustrializing and becoming probably the most mushy culture that's ever existed on the one hand. So I don't know if that type of culture with that type of incompetence in terms of just understanding, let alone building real things in the real world. Most of the engineers who built up our vital infrastructure, whether in North America or whether in Europe, most of those engineers are long retired or dead. It's lost knowledge for the most part. The new generations of engineers are being trained on computer modeling, primarily in schools. They're not building big things. We're not building mega projects. So we don't have that lived experience, that real knowledge you can get by building things and mentorship. There are trade schools, but it's far reduced in number. So
the situation,
yeah.
sorry, the situation is that the military strategy will be a completely different one in the future. It
Well, you
will
have the
be
AI
only
thing.
it
I
will
know
be
that
only small drones. For example, a
they're
small
looking at
drone,
AI and
200,000,
robotics.
300,000 drones, and that's it. With a bit,
Yeah, it's all
with
very
a
ephemeral. Now
yeah.
if you it's all very abstract, and it looks kind of good in video game theory, gaming out. They're playing these things out. in a very virtual way. But it is like video game players. Like when I look at and you listen to the speeches of leading think tank representatives from Rand Corps or the Atlantic Council, talking about how they want to prepare for the oncoming wars against Russia and China and Iran and North Korea. They're speaking like they're video game players or playing a board game. There's no sense of any of them having experienced real military processes in their own lives. They're whiteboard abstract technocrats acting like they're warriors. So it's very detached. But it's true, like the new generation of war is going to be like nothing we'd ever seen as well. Like there's going to be all sorts of, cyber, all sorts of nonlinear things that are mind-boggling to even think about. And a lot of it's on the black budget, right? Like a lot of it we don't even know about what kind of tech has been built up on all sides. Probably way more advanced than what we've been told on the surface. I would imagine. But you do seem to have this weird. It's not coming from a position of strength. Like, I mean, Europe is being broken by design. They're being eviscerated on every level. The people are being crushed, and I just look at it and at the success and the growth of the real economy and of the culture of many of those leading Eurasian powers that are scaring the oligarchy right now. And I don't think that the things that they're putting on the table are coming from a position of strength. They could just see I do think that they see their ambitions for a new world order that they control at least slipping away. And the other new world order that is being brought online is not the type of thing that they want to allow, because it's not premised. The Eurasian idea of a new world order, of a new order, because we're going to get a new order and it's going to have global aspects to it, but it doesn't have a feudalistic quality about it. And so because of that, and it's premised like Russia and China just signed a deal to accelerate their lunar industrialization project. They're going to co-build a lunar base by 2030 is the current tempo. It's a lot of this is based on making new discoveries, applying them, going outside of your limits. So the sorts of things that allow for increasing human activity and human thought is what is being encouraged. And the oligarchy this is anathema. So I don't think that they fully are in control of the ship that they're trying to steer, but they can still do destruction. So that does concern the hell out of me. Like, what are they willing to do to kick over the chessboard if they feel like it's slipping away? And are they willing to just I don't think that there's a risk necessarily in Germany aligning with China. I don't see that. But I do see a danger in a NATO and US military industrial, especially assault on Russia and China with a variety of nuclear weapons, perhaps. That is something that they might do to just, again, try to isolate the damage to Eurasia and Europe. They're willing to sacrifice most of Europe as collateral damage of a nuclear war. And what was it that I think it was Helmut Schmidt, or is it Helmut Kohl, who said that limited nuclear war doesn't mean limited nuclear war. It just means nuclear bombs going off in Germany. But these Rand Corps, Washington think tankers, they don't care. They're willing to kill Europeans as much as Chinese and Russians. They don't give a shit.
I think I see it a little bit more from the economical aspect. For example, there is a shift in the oligarchy in the US. And now, let's say there are the globalists, the complete globalists, and they are the ones who are more in the direction America first. And the US dollar is, at the moment, the US dollar is the international accepted currency. And in order to hold the American US dollar as an international currency, it is better to stop making debts. And in my opinion, Germany shall become the bad bank of the United States of America. So, for example, we are the one who fund, for example, countries which are attacked. for many reasons, and then these countries who are supported by Germany and also by Europe, because Europe can then give the money to Germany as well, can make deals with respect to weapons with the United States, and the United States can claim their, let's say, commodities. In my opinion, the security of the US dollar is established or is secured by the destruction of the euro.
Yeah, I think so. There's some points of divergence that I have in my assessment with what you've said, because the way I see it is that those who took over control of the U.S. dollar or the U.S. system in 1971 and carried out that coup created a time bomb that they knew was going to blow up. They wanted the U.S. dollar to effectively serve a destructive purpose to assist in the wealth transfer of most of the world and sovereignty transfer to this unelected shadow government that they represented from the Bilderberg group and onward. But they consciously created a tulip bubble, which, because it's a bubble, will detonate. And so they wanted the US dollar to always blow up in its face and take down, and to basically do what they failed to do in 1865, which was their attempt to break up the Union and undo 1776 through the Civil War, which failed because you had competent leadership back then that understood how to navigate this storm. So they failed it, and I think they've been relentlessly obsessed with trying to recreate that situation, but with a new modern dynamic that would involve having the U.S. cannibalize itself in chaos and create a time bomb where there was once a viable industrial economy, in order to reabsorb the U.S. after a period of hellish chaos back to the fold of a world empire that would take control of Europe. And I think a lot of this, Cynthia's book, The Empire in Which the Black Sun Never Set, goes through a lot of the writings of Count Richard Coudenhove-Kalergi, a lot of his writings, where he's very explicit as he's working with the Fabian Society and the Round Table movement in America from the 1920s onward, the creator of the Pan-European Union. It's highly fascist. And he's the father. I would say he's the primary architect of what became the European Union. Although he's not often given credit for that, it's really him more than everybody else. It's him, and also Oswald Mosley, but primarily him. And he's very explicit that he wants in his New World Order blueprint a period of regional powers, fascist controlling like different regions of the globe in a transition towards a one world government. But at the top of the one world government, in his words, should be the British Empire, a newly empowered empire that reabsorbs the USA back into the fold. That's what he wants. And he represents, I think, an opinion shared amongst many oligarchs that he works for. And they wanted to just destroy and crush any of that Republican sentiment of the European states as well, which is why they created the European Union, to break that spirit. So at the end of the day, both the enemies of Europe and the enemies of America are the same thing. And it's the same thing that wants to destroy China and Russia too. It's the same oligarchical, because Coudenhove-Kalergi represents one of these high-born families from both Coudenhove and Kalergi sides, going back a thousand years to the Crusades. And they represent that old Gnostic, esoteric underground of high priests that have been obsessed with creating a satanic world religion. And again, they wanted to destroy Russia, China, Europe, and the USA, all cultures, because they know that all cultures represent, in their best expression, an organic tendency to unite and problem solve for the greater good, if we're left alone to just be human. But they don't want to allow that. And I see that Uwe's got a thought there.
Well, in so much that I'm very happy that we are spiraling back to the original outset of this discussion about the Republican principles and and how they were being attacked, and what is it all about. So I would say, in my assessment or in my opinion, it was never about Europe. And one major blunder which the European leaders, if they were those, but I mean, you mentioned Kohl and the Schröder and Merkel and others from other countries. What they did, especially in the late 1990s and early 2000s, so Schröder, Chirac, they believed that Europe could assume a major power role. They were even discussing about Europe getting a seat in the Security Council, and stuff like that, which is, I think, a complete wishful thinking idea without any substance in terms of the interests of those involved who have been scheming setting up of Europe and destroying Europe up to the the referendum in the UK. It was meant to happen. So therefore, had Europe been smart, they would have engaged in a role to create a multipolar um, global structure, uh, and mean it, and not see themselves as uh, reaching up to the US and to Russia and China, maybe, to become another of the superpowers who tell what's going on. No, a multipolar architecture is different, because it comes from the assumption of national sovereignty in general, and Europe, uh, which originated on an economic basis, was always economically imperialist in its policies. So therefore, this proves, in my view, that it was never about Europe, but it was about using Europe to beat and torture um, other countries, prevent them from assuming the role of sovereignty, and this is something which I think is also for us now to focus on this aspect in terms of what can we do about those various scenarios. A lot of those scenarios about what your German economy will look like, also, I'm not too certain about whether it's worth wasting time, or spending time. Sorry, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but spending time on thinking along these lines without putting it into the larger context of what is happening really, and what seems to be happening is to get away with the idea of sovereignty as incorporated in the United States Constitution and Declaration of Independence.
Thank you very much. Right, we've reached the top of our hour, so unless anyone has still, very urgent message to say for the spirit of the Memorial Day weekend, um, maybe just one question of what could our viewers be anticipate for any event that might be decisive in this battle, like any current event that we might expect before the end of the year.
Mm. Mm. I typically refrain from those sorts of things personally, because there's so many things out of my awareness and control that I know I could provide. I think Uwe's kind of similar as well. I know the general principles that are at play, and I know principally what needs to happen if we're going to survive. And I try to make that as transparent as possible based on the best lessons of the past. And I know what the oligarchy wants and their modus operandi. I generally have a sense of that beast and what types of traps it's laid before us. But there's so many variables, right? Like, could we anticipate a cyber attack, a false flag operation to just kick over the chessboard and, like, you know, reset the grids of the world, blaming it on Russia or China or some other enemy? Or could it be some other 9/11 style operation? Could it be another, you know, cat flu or something that we're told has to, like, I don't know, like, it could be a variety of things that are all in alignment with the sort of nature of the beast that this empire is. And at the same measure, I know what makes them afraid, you know, which is why I tend to be very supportive of the current policies being expressed by the leadership of Russia and especially of China, and the growing array of allies that have found strength through that combined alliance. Which, without that combined alliance, then I think the world would be a lot weaker. Smaller nations would have a lot less to work with, would be much more inclined to submit immediately, whether Burkina Faso, whether Iran, whether North Korea, whatever. Like, there's so many countries that would already be crushed and have no strength to resist. They have that because of this alliance, which I know has certain attributes that I recognize as the historical thing, which the better part of humanity has expressed at our best, which has pissed off the oligarchy. So they're doing things like that, which give me hope and strength as well. And I'm hoping that, you know, my friends and allies here in the western part of the so-called West can start seeing that as something to work with instead of being afraid of. And there's so many psyops that have been put into our field, our zeitgeist. Whether if we're left leaning identities, then there's narratives that have been that we have a psych profile, and narratives have been crafted just for us to reframe reality around why we should be afraid of Russia taking over the world and why we should support the idea of even going to war with Russia. And if you're a little bit more conservative leaning, then that profile that you have as a conservative leaning person has been clearly mapped out, and those very same narratives have been reshaped so that your worldview is geared around interpreting everything around the idea that China wants to destroy you. China's your enemy. We should be supportive of going to war with China. And so it's the same, but it's the same template that's been crafted for both sides, who are both targeted for destruction and enslavement, ironically. So I think when you look at what Russia and China are actually doing to work together to create creative flanks that give us in the West a chance to also collaborate and break free of the empire, it's not a surprise. But I hope people can think more creatively and with a historical set of lessons in their mind when they're looking at the current crisis. That's what I would throw out there as my request for watchers right now. I don't know, Uwe, if you got any thoughts.
Well, yeah. In addition to this, or in the same, or in a similar related spirit, I would encourage us to again look at, me being a historian. It's something which I habitually do, but to look at those historical precedents, the good ones, especially the positive ones, the constructive ones, and in this, the U.S. Declaration of Independence in particular, with its declaration of inalienable rights, among which life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And this pursuit of happiness is something which I am very convinced has always meant to be a deeper happiness in terms of a fulfillment of the purpose of life according to the laws of the universe, as especially Gottfried Leibniz, but also other thinkers have coined it, rather than a happiness which is just, you know, hedonistic, and it goes about property and having a good time. That's not what was at stake. And this pursuit of happiness in this Christian humanist way, so not particularly the Roman Church or any other, but the spirit of Jesus Christ, who called upon his followers to focus on those universal truth. And that's something which includes beauty, or in essence is beauty, and to see beauty in a difficult situation is called the sublime. So this is something which will give us then the strength and the motivation and the courage to seek to do the right thing in terms of those fundamental values and truth. And this is what I would like us to focus on as a society, as a civilization.
Thank you. Well said. Thanks for that wonderful invitation. So, Matthew, why don't you invite now where to get in touch with you while I post all your Substack and other things?
Cool. Yeah. Well, like, I guess for people listening, go to the description box or look at the screen right now, and you'll see a bunch of links to Rising Tide Foundation, Canadian Patriot, my two websites that I manage with Cynthia, and also my Substack, which is there too. Books, I referenced one of my books that's available, easy to find by just reaching out to me on Substack or on this contact me section of Canadian Patriot. I'll tell you how to get those. Includes Cynthia's books too. I mentioned The Black Empire in Which the Black Sun Never Set. Highly important reading material, especially the first few chapters. I would say that touch on what we were talking about today. There's that. So, and also we're going to be putting out a documentary, The Hidden Hand Behind UFOs, episode 4, on Roswell and the Birth of a New Legend, which will be released tomorrow night or maybe Saturday. So people could keep an eye on that on those websites as well. They should see it coming out soon.
And in addition, Matthew has a continuing studies, sometimes on the weekdays in the evening and on the weekend. And sometimes I even end up seeing Uwe there and other of my favorite geopolitical analysts. So these Matthew and Uwe are good people to connect with. And Uwe, go ahead, please, and invite them.
Well, thank you very much. I have a Substack for the English-speaking audience, which is Never Again Is Now Global.substack.com. It is the work which I've been conducting since I met Vera Sharaf and was inspired by her and convinced by her to research these issues, which also got me in contact with Matt Ehret and Cynthia Chung, from whom I have learned almost all I can say and have said here, in terms that they have pointed me towards sources which I had never known before, which are really essential and which I would encourage everyone else to check out. Thank you very much.
And Matthew has a Telegram. Uwe, you don't have a Telegram yet, right, for the public?
I don't have there is a Telegram page for Never Again Is Now Global. If you search for Never Again Is Now Global on Telegram, you will find it. It's not very large at the moment, but yeah, if people reach out to me there, then I will get back to them and we can grow it.
Yeah, it's just that sometimes it's easy to share things in Telegram, and that's why it's good to know that some people are in Telegram, okay? And Hartmut and I invite you both in our ongoing forever partnership in Quantum Nurse Freedom International live stream. And we do have a small Telegram as well, but that's why Drago encouraged me to put one so that it's kind of easier. And thank you again, and please take care of yourselves and do the best you can in whatever way. And begin with your family, with yourself, and then expand it to the community where you live. So you like this, then thumbs up and share and subscribe, and see you all, and be well and take care.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks
Bye.
very much. Bye-bye.